Ladies and gentlemen, put your mobile phones into silent mode. The show begins right now.
Good evening, Kyiv! We got a very special guest to close off the second day here at Barometer 2019. Sother Teague, he's flown in from New York just to speak to you guys about his love and his passion. He's been bartending in New York for 19 years, and owner of Amore Amargo Bar, which means love and bitters. It's appeared in the top 100 list, which I'm sure he'll tell you all about his passion for the dedicated spirit and bitters in his talk. His claim to fame, when he was younger, I believe, he was a paid amateur skateboarder. But I think that may have been put off because I think last week he got hit by a car, so give him some extra time to come along on stage. So if I can ask you to be upstanding. You know the score by now. And let's hear a huge Kiev welcome to the New Yorker, Sother Teague! Woo!
Oh yeah, Flight of the Bumblebee, that's my life. We're gonna talk about bumblebees in this, that's why they played that music, I think. Super excited to be here. Listen, I got a question. I'm going to kick the thing off with a question for the audience. There's a new restaurant in Kiev that serves spaghetti and sushi and tacos, and I'm curious who'd like to go there. And I can't really see anybody. Does that sound interesting? Maybe? What if I said there's a new restaurant that only serves spaghetti? Does that give you more interest in going there? Yeah, right? Why don't you think about bars in this way, right? That's how I think about my bar and all my bars. I have several. Right? If you go to a restaurant that only serves one thing, or a bar like mine that only serves one thing, we're really hyper-focused. And focus generates what is the true definition of craft, right? Bruce Lee, who was a man of action more than a man of words, famously said, I don't fear the man who practices 10,000 punches one time each. I fear the man who practices one punch 10,000 times. And so at my bar, the rigorous focus that we have on the drinks that we make means that we've certainly made those drinks 10,000 times, right? So we should be feared in the cocktail world in some way. Also, I think that when you have a bar that's hard focused, or a restaurant even, or business of any kind for that matter, that's hard focused, you generate a sense of community among your guests. I always think about it like, if we're all drinking different things at the bar, then we aren't really there together. You know what I mean? If your group, someone's having a craft beer, someone else is having a natural wine, someone else is having a fat-washed whiskey cocktail, someone else is drinking a daiquiri, you're not really sort of in this together, right? So I like to create that focus so that we stay together. Imagine, again, back to the restaurant analogy, imagine if you asked a chef to be ready to prepare so many different styles of cuisine and do it in a timely manner and make it, delicious. Like, the kitchen would be a madhouse at all times trying to keep up with all of that. There's a 24-hour diner just around the corner from my bar in Manhattan where I can go and I can get an omelet, a bowl of matzo ball soup, and baked clams at 5 in the morning, right? But none of those items are very good because they have no focus as to what they're doing, you know? Meanwhile, if that place just served omelets, I'd probably be excited to go there every morning when I got off work. And how you can create that sort of focus at your bar is by having, of course, an ethos, or at least having like a themed menu from time to time, you know? My best friend Damon Bolte, at his bar, they do a themed menu each quarter. For instance, they did one called Drink Pink, where all of the cocktails were pink. So suddenly now, at least if you're not drinking the same thing, everyone's got a same sort of color palette in their hands. And not only that, so does the entire room, right? So you start to tie the room together as well. You know, there's a place in New York City called Keen's Steakhouse. Pretty amazing place. Obviously, they serve steaks, and when you go there, everyone gets a steak, right? At your table, at every table around you. There's another place in New York City that's called Peter Luger's Steakhouse. It's been around for over 100 years. They only serve porterhouse steaks. So not only are your group in there having a porterhouse steak, every group around you is having a porterhouse steak. So dedication to that craft, dedication to that focus, and then, of course, tying the room together and making everyone feel like they're all there together, doing and enjoying the same thing. What happens at my tiny bar often is that people will be in the room, shoulder to shoulder. It's important to mention the bar's 240 square feet. I think that's 73 square meters. You know, my bar would fit in this, frankly, my bar fit on this stage almost 5 times. And when everyone's in there, shoulder to shoulder, drinking their drinks, they're all kind of in it together. And I live in New York City, not necessarily known as the friendliest city in the world, but every single night at some point or another, when the room is full, there'll be a new pair of guests looking at their menu, trying to decide what they want, standing right next to people drinking their drinks, and they'll say, I think I'm going to try the Sharpie Mustache, is one of our famous drinks. And the people standing next to them will say, that's what I'm having, taste it, right? Suddenly I've created a community where everybody in the room is friends and friendly because everybody in the room is there to do the same thing. Sorry, I don't do PowerPoints, I just read off my phone. It also is a little bit unnerving to me when I go to bars and somehow I'm sitting there drinking, again, that fat-washed whiskey cocktail, and there's a guy sitting next to me who's just drinking a beer and a shot or a Boilermaker or what have you. I don't really want to sit in either of those chairs most of the time. I try and think to myself, back to the food world, you know, I don't want to sit and eat a hot dog and a can of beer right next to someone who's enjoying a multi-course meal with a, you know, accompanying wine pairing. You know, and the way that I think of that in my mind also is like, Le Bernardin is a very famous restaurant in New York City run by Eric Repair, and they serve incredibly delicious, beautiful, fresh seafood at a very, very high price. You know, and it all comes back to guest expectation. You know, McDonald's and Le Bernardin both serve fish, right? What's my expectation of what I'm getting when I go in there? So the divide, I think, is pretty great. Anyway, that's just kind of giving you some insight on the way that my mind thinks about how I run my bar, how I think about bars in general, and restaurants for that matter. So now I'll talk a little bit about myself. They asked me to talk about myself and my bar. I was a chef for 12 years. All over the country of America. I grew up in Florida. I left home when I was 17 years old. I've lived in 12 states in the United States, and I cooked all over the country until I got to New York City, where I accidentally fell into a job behind a bar. So I've never cooked in New York, got my first bar job there, and never went back to the kitchen again. I think for me, the difference was being able to have a guest interaction. You know, behind those double doors, you never know what happens once the food goes out to the dining room. You never know if there's even really people out there. It could all be a hoax. Most notably, when I was a chef, I taught at the New England Culinary Institute up in Montpelier, Vermont. I taught butchery and ice carving, charcuterie, sausage making, etc. And most notably, I think to people, when they hear it, I was the research and technical chef for a very famous television show on the Food Network called Good Eats. So yeah, I've been in New York City for 19 years and bartending the entire time. Amore Margot is now 8.5 years old, and in the last 14 months, I've opened 4 other bars. and I'm opening yet another bar before December, so I've been pretty busy this year. In addition, I have a radio show each week called The Speakeasy. It's live radio, but it's also a podcast that you can find on all platforms. I encourage you to take a listen. Show's been on for coming up on 9 years, and I've been the host for just over 3.5 of those 9 years. And you've got about 350 episodes you can go catch back up on. And recently, I wrote a book called I'm Just Here for the Drinks, which is available at bookstores, wherever you like to shop, or Amazon, of course, has that stuff as well. So I stay pretty busy, is what I'm saying. And in the midst of all that, as Kenji mentioned, I was hit by a car a couple of weeks ago, and I'm still pretty stiff, but I'll walk it off. Part of the focus of today's talk is bitters, of course, so we're going to talk about that. And I know that everyone in this room is, somewhat professional in this field. But I do think there's some things that need to be, noted on how they're made and why they're made. The collective subconscious of the world started making bitters at the same time everywhere, especially tincture bitters. And I think that this helped shape the map of the world by, when we were primitive, we discovered that we could chew on some roots and barks and things like that and start to feel better, some sort of medicate ourselves in some ways. But that stuff didn't travel well, right? So we started mixing it into water, making almost like a tea, and this medicine could travel a little further from the hut, maybe. Then once we had ferments like beer and wine, we could add those things to that, and they would last even longer. We could go further away from home and come back. And then we got distilled spirits, and we can add that stuff to them, and it's shelf stable forever, and we can travel all over the world and have medicine with us to keep us healthy as we go, right? Oops, things skipped a page here. So yeah, all that started happening just because, out of kind of necessity, it was also when you had things that were nutritive, but the winter was coming and those things weren't going to last, you stored them in alcohol so that you could at least get that nutritive value later when the weather was inclement and you needed, strength and energy. There are two main categories of bitters, tincture and potable. Tinctures are, the little guys that we use just drops of. Potables are drinkable bitters. Potable just means drinkable. And they're both built on the same concept. There's basically a three-pronged stand on which they are erected, right? Alcohol is always the base. Then in the center is a bittering agent. Bittering agents are any number of roots, nuts, barks, seeds, berries, flowers, etc. And then the top note, of course, is the flavor agent. I think easily the world's most recognized tincture bitter is Angostura, which has the oversized paper label and the yellow cap. It's alcohol. Gentian is the bittering agent in there. Top notes are cinnamon and cardamom. Probably the most notable potable bitter is Campari. Alcohol, bittering agent in the center, notes of burnt orange and caramel on the top. The difference between the two is tincture bitters are much higher in ABV, alcohol by volume, much higher in ABV, much more concentrated in flavor, and typically involve very little, if any, sweetening agents. So they're wildly out of balance. Very difficult to drink a glass of Angostura before lunch, but very easy to have a glass of Campari before lunch. There are the other difference I think is that, or at least notable thing, is that potable bitters are always sweetened, lower in ABV, softer in flavor notes, so they can be drank by the glass, right? But I think it's important to note the word amaro means bitter in Italian. The item, the product amaro, means bittersweet liqueur. So I think it's, pretty powerful thing, especially in my bar where that's all we sell, the confusion that causes to your typical guest when they come in the door. They hear that it's amaro, they think that just means bitter, so all these things are totally bitter, right? Absolutely not. They're well balanced. They're meant to be drank and meant to be enjoyed. And it's easy enough to think about, when I explain it to them, I say, well, tincture bitters are just the seasoning to the soup that is the potable bitters and the other things that we have on the bar, right? Anybody in the room making their own bitters for their bar, tincture bitters? A couple. I don't think you should. I worked for a bitters company for a while. I worked for Bitterman's Bitters, and we have, a lot of processes that have to be thought about and mathed out to make those things consistent and delicious. And I think you should make bitters in your life at least once, just so you kind of understand the mechanics of how it's made. But the bottom line is, whatever flavor it is you're looking for, someone's out there making it. They've done all the hard work, all the math, and those mathematics include things like weights and measures, temperatures, maceration times, etc., that we used to keep charts and graphs to understand how long we macerated things, what temperature they were at when we did that, when things went in, when things came out. It's a lot of work, and if you're making your own, I doubt you're being that meticulous. And then I also doubt that even if you do make something that you think is really great, I doubt you could repeat that process on a regular basis. So my suggestion is make them one time and then go out and purchase them instead of having to wait around and see if they're good or not, because you're going to spend more money plus time, which is money, just making your own product, and when you can just buy one and start using it today. There are thousands of amari out there, and even I think more tincture bitters at this point, because of what seems like a renewed interest. And I think that renewed interest comes from the cocktail renaissance that we went through that I think we're already over. I think we've won that fight. You can get a decent Negroni in most towns in the world now, I think. And so I decided 8.5 years ago to create a bar just based almost entirely around Amaro. At Amore Amargo, in my, again, 240 square feet, we have the world's largest collection of both tincture and potable bitters. I always say over 500. I think probably now it's over 700 tinctures. And I have hovering right around 320 potable bitters on the back bar. We have only 21 spirits, one kind of from representing every category, so that we can make drinks using those things. You can create tons of layers of flavors without complicated house-made ingredients by choosing different amari, which is a great advantage for a business because they're shelf-stable. I love telling people that at my bar, the only non-alcoholic ingredient on the entire bar is water. Everything else I have is alcohol. We don't use any mixers, any juices, no syrups, nothing house-made. Everything comes out of a bottle. This is pretty fascinating because it means that 8.5 years in, any drink that's ever been on the menu, we can recreate as long as the bottles are still on the bar, right? Plus, we are a retail store. We sell bitters. In America, I can't sell alcohol because I'm on-premise license. But we sell bitters, so we can make you whatever recipe that we've ever made. If you'd like it, we'll write it down for you. You can purchase the bitters from us. Then you can go to a liquor store and purchase the booze, and then you can go to your house and make the drink without having to make something first, right? So it's a huge bonus to our guests that we're so giving of our recipes, and that they can make them. Like people making drinks at home aren't interested in being as complicated as we might be behind the bar. And I think the bitters and amari are trending right now. And maybe I think that because I've been doing it for so long, but I look around and I see more amari on bars all over the place. Maybe my little bar had some influence over that. We've gotten recognition from all over the world, so hopefully, the idea is getting out there. And I think it's a great thing because these things have been being made for hundreds of years, and also dozens of new ones are popping up all the time from all over the world. I think it's also important to note that the word amaro, plural amari, is Italian, but we've come to understand that the thing, amaro, the product, is any bittersweet liqueur from anywhere in the world. So let's talk about the bar a little bit. Small but mighty. Again, 240 square feet. But it makes no sense, and it didn't make sense when we started it. And the way that I explain that is I ask you another hypothetical question, and I say, erase from your mind Amore Margot exists. It never existed. It's gone. And then add to your mind that you'd like to maybe invest in a bar, and then I'm going to pitch, right? And I say, I'm going to start with a room that used to be a closet. I'm going to start with a room that used to be a closet. It was a dry storage of the kitchen that runs another bar that I'm connected to. I'm literally sort of the weird roommate in this situation who took the room nobody wanted. I got them to move their dry storage to the basement, and I said, all right, we got this tiny room. Because it's so small, it's very difficult to light, so it's poorly lit. It's got very low ceilings. I'm only allowed to play background vocalist jazz music from a single speaker system because I made a deal with my neighbor who'd lived above this closet for 30 years, and suddenly we're in there making noise. I've got no seats. I don't have room for them. And I've got a whole list of ingredients and things that, frankly, nobody has heard of and very few people care about. And we're only going to make 3 drinks. We make old fashions, Manhattans, Negronis, and that's it. Every single drink we've made in 8.5 years is a version of those 3 drinks. So you think to yourself, yeah, I totally want to invest in this crazy dream. Meanwhile, we opened the doors in 3 weeks. It took us 3 weeks from the time of getting those guys to move their stuff out of the room to the time that we opened the doors. We spent $7,000. Did you know that, Tober? $7,000. We spent $7,000. I only ever have 3 employees at a time, plus myself. I bartend at the bar 3 nights a week, so there's 4 of us. And in 2018, we closed the books at $1,067,000 in revenue, meaning that if we just cut it 4 ways between the 4 of us, we each did somewhere in the neighborhood of $250,000 in sales over the course of the year, which is incredible, and it makes, again, no sense. They played Flight of the Bumblebee on my way in because when I talk to people, I talk about the bar like it's a bumblebee. It's not aerodynamically sound, but somehow it flies. And then people always ask me, well, why did you choose to make this crazy bar with all bitters? It's primarily how I drink. I mentioned before that I was a chef for a long time, and I think that just built my palate to be a little bit more savory or focused on savory flavors. But when I first got started behind the bar, I spread my wings. You know, I mentioned I was a research chef, so I was a researcher. I taught at a culinary school, so I was an educator. I wanted to educate myself, and through research on drinks, that's what I was doing while I was on the job. I wanted to be good at my job, so I had to go out and find that information, just like you're doing here now, right? You find education. So I was reading everything I could get my hands on. This is 19 years ago, so there weren't as many like blogs, there weren't as many books, but I tried to get a hold of everything I could and do a lot of research. And then, so I was painting with a wide brush in the beginning. But as I got more experienced in bartending, I noticed that my palate drifted to the more sort of bolder flavors, stronger drinks, spirit only, stirred. The category just keeps whittling and whittling down. And then I was like, this doesn't exist. We have to always remember that what we do is tons of fun, and you get to fly all over the world and talk about it if you're lucky, and you get to write books. But at the bottom line of it all, it's a business, right? And I thought to myself, this business doesn't exist. I can open this up and be, my friend Philip Duff, who was talking here yesterday, he says all the time that his Geneva is now the #1 selling Geneva in America. And I said, well, who's your competition? And he said, well, if you want to be #1 at something, pick a category that has no competition. So I opened a bar that didn't exist, and we dominate, right? And then why only stirred? Well, that's a self-fulfilling answer, right? We don't use any juice or sugars or syrups. There's nothing that needs to be stirred or shaken. And then again, why bitter? From a sales point of view, it's a tough sell. My bar has become an educational space, right? When guests walk in, we have to coax them in. We have to educate them about what it is we do and how we do it and why we do it, When we first opened, the thing that we sold the most was no. People would come in and they'd say, oh, a new bar. I'll have a rum and Coke. No. Oh, a cocktail bar. I'll have a daiquiri. No. Oh, a fancy cocktail bar. I'll have a last word. No. So we got 3 no's in a row before we get to the place where we can even say, let's talk about a yes. Let's find a drink that I can make for you. So it was a lot of education in the beginning. Thankfully, after this long, now people sort of understand what we are, so they don't come in and ask for sushi at the hamburger joint or whichever way you want to play that analogy. So it makes it a lot better for us. And for the guests, they have a better time. And we only taste 5 things: sweet, sour, salty, umami, which means savory, and of course, my favorite, bitter. All right? And of those 5, only one of them is an acquired taste. And of course, guess which one? It's bitter, my favorite. And the reason that it's an acquired taste is because we're hardwired from our biology to perceive the bitterness as a potential threat to our lives and thus to our species as a whole. So when we taste bitter, the first thing, right as it touches the tongue, the brain sets off an alarm that says, this is bad for you. Get it out of your system. Don't continue. You're walking down the wrong road. So this activates your system to move things through, right? So if you're on an empty stomach, this creates hunger, right? That's why we have aperitifs, mostly with bitter things, right? But the same is true at the end of the meal when you're full. That same reaction happens and it starts the system so that it moves things out, right? So that's the difference between aperitif and digestif. But you have to learn to taste, to learn to enjoy these things. You have to do an end run on your mind. You have to be able to taste this thing and tell your brain, wait a minute, brain, I know this might be something that could set off the alarm, but I can take it in doses that aren't going to be a threat to my life. So maybe you say, you tried Chinar one time and you didn't like it. Well, you got to try it another time, and maybe even a third time, so that maybe you can acquire the taste for that bitter thing that's not going to be harmful to you. We do it with all other booze, we just don't know it, right? Bourbon, first time you taste bourbon, it's got that ethanol, and that's a bitter as well, and that strikes that chord, and you say, oh, I don't like this, right? But you want the result, so you keep going back to it. Well, the same thing is true of all Amari and bitters as well. And I always think about it like bitter being an acquired taste is not a bad thing. If children ran the world, we would have no broccoli. Broccoli's bitter enough to turn off a child's palate, so they'd never go forward. But you have to come back to it and taste it again and say, I really do enjoy this. And then the other unique and interesting thing about that hardwiring, just a little side note, is temperature plays a huge role. Aroma dictates 90% of flavor. Up until about 2 years ago, they said 80%, but they've elevated it to 90 because they include the back palate, smelling from the back side of your palate. 90% of flavor, but so if we can think about that and something maybe that we're not even going to eat, like let's say a rose, you take a rose from the garden in the summertime and smell it, and it smells like a rose, floral and beautiful. But if you take that same rose and put it in a freezer for 3 hours and then go back and smell it, it smells like nothing, right? The temperature drop has compressed the volatile oils and made them not as easy to receive to your olfactory sense. Now, if you were going to eat that rose, it would only have, a minimum amount of its flavor potential because of the aroma being missing, right? But when you take something like spirituous alcohol and chill it to a freezer temperature, let's pick on somebody while we're here. Let's say Jägermeister with that machine that freezes the Jäger down to well below freezing because it's a liquid, it's alcohol that's a liquid, so it can stay liquid well below the freezing temperature. And you see that frat boy with his hat on backwards take down that shot of Jägermeister and make that horrible face. It's because even though he couldn't catch the aromas of all the things that are in Jägermeister, I know there's anise and grapefruit peel and ginger. Those things were compressed so much that you couldn't smell them, and then pushing that liquid so cold across your soft palate is freezing your taste buds, so they're doing very little of their job as well. But again, that hard wiring that says that bitterness might be something that's potentially a threat to our lives and species dictates that you will perceive it no matter what. So they make that horrible face because all they got was a big mouthful of bitter instead of the range of ingredients and flavors that are in that product, right? So we have to think about that when we make drinks. At Amore Margot, anyway, and anywhere. You should think about that anywhere. I want to talk just a little bit about the success of the bar and how bitters played a major role in that. We chose a category and a line of products that I think were at the time. I think now, almost 9 years later, it's trending to have Amari and bitters and use them and even make your own maybe. Or start a company and make your own. Many distilleries that had no intention of making these things have started making them in America. Suddenly my shelf of domestic Amari is more than tripled in the last 2 years. I think I have somewhere around 40 right now. But to pick a product that's got such a range and such a capability of creating so many amazing drinks, but that no one knows about is, frankly, I don't recommend it. It's very difficult. But at the same time, we wanted to showcase our passion for something and showcase that we had a desire to make something that was unique and special. I often say to my friends who own bars or operate bars, I could have opened a sports bar. And then when I went to my own sports bar, if I felt like I can't be here because I'm just going to be working if I'm here, that's fine. I can go to another sports bar. I have not been a guest at Amore Margot since we opened, not once. When I go in there, I feel like I have to get to work. I look around the room and I see someone needs water, someone needs a menu, someone needs attention in some way, and I can't be there. So I've never gone to enjoy the thing that's unique in the world that I created. So it's a tough sort of, I didn't know that was going to happen, by the way. I thought I would go there all the time. But I think it's a tough thing sometimes to create something that's unusual and unique and new. But also, I would say it's done us a great deal of good. To be so specific and so focused means that we get a lot of attention and a lot of love from the press. I get, like I said, I get to go all over the world and talk about the bar. And in the past couple of years, we've gotten lots of awards. Kenji mentioned that we're on the best bars in the world list this year, number 94. Not a bad hit for, out of all the bars in the world. In the past, we've won awards for Best Single Focus Bar, Best Concept Bar. We were nominated for the World's Best Spirits list last year, which, when we were nominated, I literally found out and I laughed out loud. I thought, how could I be the World's Best Spirits list? I have one bourbon, one mezcal, right? But you look at the parameters for the list and it says, well, either a broad stroke or it says a heavy focus. So, of course, we fit the bill. And again, in the same year, we were also nominated for Best American Cocktail Bar. As mentioned, I don't have seats. It's not a very comfortable room. But what that's telling me over and over is that because we decided to be so singular of focus and because we decided to take on a category that was maybe